And I shouldn't have scheduled her on the first bring back opportunity after the Thanksgiving. People are still in the gym trying to burn off all the food. So between those two things, that's not the way to treat somebody that you feel hold in such high regard. But they are both inadvertent. The show should go on.
Oh, for sure. In fact, one thing I was thinking is, I don't know if everyone might like to just come closer.
Yes, yes.
And so I'm speaking to you.
But I do have to introduce the speaker to let you know, as few as you are, how highly qualified she is to give this talk. She's only a few years removed from her PhD, and she has achieved a great deal in that period. She got her BA in History from University of California, Davis, an MA in Theater Arts from from California State University at Sacramento, and an MFA in Dramatic Arts from University of California, Davis, and her PhD in 2009 from the University of California, Davis. All of this is to say that she is a California relative, or native. Since coming here, she has published and given talks quite extensively. Among her publications, are pieces that appeared in various highly regarded journals, including About Performance, Australasian Drama Studies, Body, Space and Technology, ROLGA, an Australian journal about dance, Canadian Journal of Practice-Based Research in Theatre, the Journal of Dance Education, Research in Dance Education, and Theatre, Dance and Performing Training. And she has essays about performance and community, have included the edited volume African Theatre, Diasporas, and another one, Embodied Consciousness, Performance Technologies, published by Palgrave. She is a co-author with Dov Reisner of a piece entitled Art Education Policy Review in the International Journal of Education and the Arts. She is the author of a book entitled Meeting Places, Locating Desert Consciousness in Performance, which was published in 2014. She has several interests in her area, including site-specific and place-based performance, community arts, arts for social action, and so on. And publications include the book I've just mentioned, and also with Anderson and Reisner, a book entitled Hybrid Lives of Teaching Artists in Dance and Theatre, a critical reader. And she has several other publications. So she is very highly qualified, and I'm sure that many people would have come to this talk had I not scheduled it in such an impropitious time. I'm particularly grateful to her for her involvement in the Humanity Center. This, I think, is her second or third Birnbach talk. I don't think it's, she has been a resident scholar in the center. That is when I got to know her best, and to see how broadly and deeply educated she was. She was one of the best resident scholar citizens that I've ever had in the program, and she has participated in working groups and been funded from us in that way. And I hope that she will continue to support us. Today she's going to talk to us about specialities of artistic citizenship. So in this bleak, cold day, please give a very warm Humanities Center welcome to Professor Mary Elizabeth Anderson.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you so much, Walter. You're just, I really appreciate how generous you always have been with me in all of our interactions. It's a generosity I think you extend to every single person that you encounter. And so I just appreciate how much you and the Humanities Center really have grounded my work and have given me a place to explore ideas and share and share with people that I wouldn't otherwise. So I know I've met at least a couple of you before. I've seen you at talks, and it doesn't bother me in the slightest that there's 3 of you. I think it's fantastic, and so I appreciate that you came out, and I look forward to the conversation. Also wanted to suggest how much I'm appreciative of the Center for the Study of Citizenship, and Mark Crewman, who runs that organization or that unit, and I guess he's got a talk coming up next week.
Yes.
So yeah, this is a place, one of the other places on campus that has really helped to nurture and support some of my initial ideas. So the Mike Kelly work, I think I started around 2012. Oh my gosh, it has been 3 years. It's been 3 years since I really in earnest started to try writing about this idea. As Walter has suggested, I have a lot of publications in like dance education, Australia, African diasporic performance, these sorts of things. And so why and how have I landed at Mike Kelly's work? And I have to say the most honest reason that I've been attracted to the work initially, and why I think I've been sustained by it for the last 3 years, is because of how uncomfortable it makes me. Here's the mobile homestead. It's just down the street a few blocks on Woodward, just sort of behind kitty corner to the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit. So I'm sure all of us have passed by there or even through there many times. And so when I found out about the work, I already knew about Mike Kelly. As an artist, I had like a little idea of his career, and I was never super, oh, Mike Kelly, I'm fascinated by you. But I knew he existed, and I knew that he was an interesting maker of work, and I knew that he had written a ton about his work. So he's one of those artists who writes a lot. And around the time that I became interested in Mobile Homestead, this project that he created, sort of shortly thereafter, he passed away tragically from suicide. And so I think that's added another layer of fascination for me. So if initially I was attracted to this work because it made me uncomfortable and I didn't understand the nature of my discomfort, I then became even more committed to trying to understand why and how I was responding the way I was, not only by continuing to write and talk about it, but by reading a lot of his own writing and listening to lots of his interviews that he gave, because he's incredibly articulate and complicated. And so he's not here anymore, and yet this work carries on. The work has a life of its own. So it just made me all the more curious. So I'll share this the writing that I'm working on right now, and I really invite you to stop me at any time with questions or thoughts or anything like that. And I'm imagining my talk for about half an hour. Is that kosher? Is that a typical? Okay. Okay, good. So, slide 1. Mobile Homestead is a reconstruction of Mike Kelly's childhood home in Detroit's suburb of Westland. So Westland's just west of here, I think.
It's like 20 miles, like, yeah.
Yeah, it's not far, but it's the part of the Detroit metro area. So he grew up in Westland. And so this is a reconstruction of the home where he grew up and lived until adolescence. And this piece that you see here, the thing that more or less lives right behind the MoCAD, has so far undergone 3 phases of development. So in the first phase of the project's realization, which began in 2010, a replica of the facade of the house was placed on, as you can see, a flatbed truck and toured from the city of Detroit back to Westland and then back to Detroit again. Tons of photos and videos were documented this phase, and they were also shown as part of the 2012 Whitney Biennial. And that accumulation of work that was shown as part of the biennial was accompanied by a scathing critique of public art written by Kelly himself in his sort of characteristically antagonistic tone. He has a sort of known, seemingly antagonistic relationship to even his own work. So in this case, he's sort of, this is a piece of public art that he described as being done in bad faith, because all public art is doomed to failure, according to this essay. The second phase of the realization of the project occurred after Kelly's tragic death by suicide in early 2012, and has involved the construction of the full-scale version of the Westland House, which is now a permanent fixture at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Detroit. The third phase has included the development of a curatorial program of community activities that take place inside the mobile homestead. So what you see inside, it looks a lot sort of like your clinical setting. You know, it doesn't really have any distinctive features, and that's what the mobile homestead looks like inside. So outside, it has all of the distinctive features of the edifice of his house, but inside, it's got this sort of all I can think of is clinical. It's this very clinical, sort of sanitized look. And what you're seeing here is one of the first public or community-based art projects that has that's occurred in a series. In this case, this referred to as the Homestead Depot. Obviously, taking off on this idea of a Home Depot, using crafts and found objects and other materials that people would bring in to then generate new works. So Mobile Homestead today thus bears several distinct yet intertwined identities as a nomadic sculpture, because it travels around. Recently it's been to Los Angeles, it goes places, because the face can still and always detach, get back on a truck and go somewhere. It's also a site-specific installation and a designated community space located in Midtown Detroit. It's a bright white ranch-style structure, complete with a 2-car garage and a patch of fertilized lawn. And so the work offers a sort of complex meditation on space, place, time, memory, identity. It is autobiographical in the most direct way, yet because of the structure's unusual positioning within the city of Detroit, the work, like many of Kelly's earlier sculptures, films, and performances, is, I think, designed to expose and pervert its own autobiographical limitations. So he's always sort of doubling things over, creating spirals of meaning intentionally. So the thing that you see is the thing that you see, and it's also many, many other things that are not seen, and it's many other sort of meaning ricochets off of the project in lots of different possible ways. And this is what I mean when I say it sort of exposes its autobiographical limitations and also intentionally sort of perverts it, twists it in different ways. Mobile Homestead juxtaposes the dream architecture of 1950 suburbia against the emergent landscape of what we know as what's in our midst, a tentatively revitalized sliver of urban space located in the center of one of the most abidingly disenfranchised cities in the US. And so the work comments quizzically on the philosophical undercurrents of presence and absence, insideness and outsideness in Detroit. As Dennis Hollier explains, an architectural structure is not just a simple container, but a place that shapes matter and exerts a performative action on whatever inhabits it. It works on its occupant. So Kelly's homestead as a replication of the very foundational structure that shaped him during his formative years, or one of the many structures. And he has numerous other projects, including a work called Educational Complex, which explores in a different way using miniature models like all of the most important architectural structures that shaped him throughout his life, early schools, and his home is featured in that piece as well. So the homestead is this a three-dimensional phenomenological illustration of the performative nature of the domestic sphere, yet that characterization of the work ultimately plays only a minor role in the way the piece seems to produce meaning due to the bizarre particularities of its intentionally out-of-context geographic positioning. Placing the simulacrum of this house in the otherwise alien context of Midtown Detroit, not just miles, but I would suggest worlds away from its seeming point of origin in the suburb of Westland, produces a potent set of cognitive and aesthetic frictions, and these frictions are, I think, some of the most interesting parts of the work. But the pattern that I've noticed and I've explored in other presentations, I won't necessarily explore this so much here, is that the institutional rhetoric, the MOCAD's rhetoric, and the other organizations like Art Angel who have supported the making of this work, they gravitate towards sort of moralistic platitudes about the good work that this is doing, the community-based work that it's doing. And that is one level of meaning. But because my perception is that Kelly is working always on multiple levels, and often intentionally conflicting types of meaning, that this whole idea of, oh, it's so great, there's this community center, that's only one dimension of it. And if we only pay attention to that, we're missing an opportunity to think about some of the other weird problems that emerge from the work. Grant Kester points out that place-based, community-engaged art practices are frequently interpreted solely in terms of their presumed transgressive value. Existing descriptions of mobile homestead are dominated by assertions that the work performs an ameliorative, corrective function within the distressed landscape of Detroit. So the narrative is dependent on the idea and the reality of a distressed Detroit landscape and this white house coming in and addressing those problems. So to this extent, the interpretation of mobile homestead is informed by the notion that art is a kind of revelatory gesture in which artists project generic theoretical postulates onto a given context, situation, or site, treating site as an opportunity to discover ostensibly hidden structures. So the situation, as Kester describes it, has not emerged in a vacuum. Instead, an intricate set of social, economic, and political factors have contributed to the rise of what I've been exploring, this idea of the artist as citizen. And the artist as citizen is tasked with things like demonstrating the transformative power of the arts in and of themselves, enacting social and cultural transformations with and through the arts, and embodying transformative potential by virtue of their status as artist. A brief survey of perspectives on the artist as citizen reveals these three common approaches to the understanding of the function of the artist in an otherwise hostile US climate. And when I say hostile, I just mean sort of not generally receptive, not fundamentally receptive. Oh, the arts are inherently good. As the arts are a suspicion, or a source of suspicion. In his 2005 book, Artist as Citizen, the then president of Juilliard, Joseph Polisi, calls on artists to be advocates for the arts, to show the power of the arts to a nation and its people who are often uninformed about the arts, true enough, and view these activities with suspicion, occasional disdain, frequently as being irrelevant. As he references, for periods of time during the 20th century, artists of a certain caliber enjoyed a luxury of support, public and private funding, popular reverence, and political capital. However, as Polisi's tenure as president of Juilliard spanned the period both before and after the infamous culture wars that led to the gutting of the National Endowment for the Arts and an abiding public suspicion regarding the value of the arts, by 2005, Polisi is compelled to call for artists to arm themselves with knowledge of the intricacies of society so that they might more effectively convince that society of the value of the arts. I'm going to show you several different the work of several other artists who all, I think, are participating in this phenomenon of the artist as citizen. Somehow their work is emblematic of this. Oh wait, did I forget? Oh, here we go. Okay, here she is. All right, so this is, the next 3 slides are from an artist named Suzanne Lacey. This project is called Between the Door and the Street, and it took place in Brooklyn in 2013. And Suzanne Lacey has become quite famous for staging conversations. So she works in visual art, or you might even say performance art. She goes to sites like Oakland, California, or places like Brooklyn, and she creates these places, these spaces for conversation. And so you have women on the steps here who are discussing issues that are of relevance to them. So in a sense, Lacey employs non-artists to kind of complete her work in this sense, thereby showing the function of art as a container wherein social things can happen or transformative things can happen. On the other side of the conversation, of course, you see this audience. So this is, instead of audience members, viewers standing in a gallery and receiving the work in that way, now they're standing on the street and they're participating in this stage conversation. When I say stage, I don't mean that it was scripted in any way, but the sense that she creates a platform, she creates a stage whereby this can happen. The year after The Artist as Citizen was published, Richard Rice created an organization called Artist as Citizen, an educational nonprofit organization dedicated to bringing ideas and information to the public in fresh ways in order to promote the critical thinking necessary to democracy. Visit to the website for Artist as Citizen reveals 15 example projects that have been cultivated by the organization with descriptions like a user's guide to a sustainable New York City, an international campaign dedicated to building a movement to unite the world around solutions to the climate crisis. So very specifically art's instrumental values, using art to solve something like the climate crisis. Rice's Artist Citizen is a facilitator, kind of in the mode of Lacey, perhaps a public figure, but not necessarily, who has the creative tools to help illustrate the importance of non-arts issues. By illuminating the importance of ideas from outside the arts are thereby validated as useful, and the artist is reincorporated into an idealized democratic situation. So the next 3 slides are from an artist named Thomas Hirshhorn. This piece is called Gramsci Monument, and it was constructed outside something called the Forest Houses, which is a public housing project in the Bronx. This is also from 2013. So interesting parallel to the mobile homestead and creating this form of temporary architecture that people could go inside, they could create things, they could read, they could sit on this couch made out of tape. There's different ways, offering different ways to participate. Situated somewhere between Polisi and Rice's, Ann Pasternak was the president and artistic director of Creative Time, an established nonprofit organization that funds the work of visual artists. In late 2012, Creative Time started something called Creative Time Reports, a web-based platform devoted to artist commentary and ideas about public issues. Pasternak explains that the rationale behind the creation of the project is that artists are great at looking into those places where there are gaps, where others may not belong. They do this with creativity, and in the process help us see things differently, perhaps more complexly, more compassionately, more completely. Like Polisi, Pasternak places the artist and their identity as an art maker first. In this case, the artist is not employed to use her skills and creative media in order to express the ideas of others. Rather, the artist is invited to comment on public issues. That commentary is then offered to media outlets as well as to social justice organizations, helping us, quote, helping us expand the reach of the artists we feature in the global community. So artists for Pasternak are positioned as special people with unique perspectives on the world and its issues. By broadcasting artist perspectives in this way, Pasternak is able to demonstrate their relevance. Quote, we asked ourselves, if we really believe in artists, if we really believe that art and artists matter in the world, how could we broadcast their voices to have a much greater impact? Here, Pasternak adopts a point of view on the artist as citizen that has more in common with Rice, to the extent that she's mobilizing a narrative about the translational value of artistic thinking. Although she is not like Rice, engaging artists in the production of creating work that illuminates a public issue, she is positioning artists as capable of purveying the quote-unquote critical thinking necessary to a democracy. So these next 3 slides are from an artist named Alison Smith, who created something called The Muster in 2007. Also on, I can't remember the name of the island, one of the islands off of New York, not Long Island. It's like this little weird little island, Governor's Island. Thank you, Governor's Island. So this is a more, I would say in some ways more of a performative response to the idea of artist as citizen, and more of a sort of like, so she's inviting people to come set up. There's this sort of like historical component to it, but it's still organized around issues. It's an issue-based, like a social issue-based project. Within these configurations of the artist as citizen, site is often presumed to be an accumulation of what Kester refers to as certain static functions or states of being, into which the artist intervenes and thereby transgresses. It is thus the reductive interpretation of site or place, I believe, in these instances, that seems to contribute to the resulting reduction of interpretation of the site-based artwork. So why does meaning seem to collapse around the mobile homestead? Why does it collapse into this idea that mobile homestead is just there to serve an ameliorative function? Why isn't there more of a robust critical dialogue about what else the mobile homestead does? Not even like what happens inside the mobile homestead, but just really how does it produce meaning just by virtue of its very presence and its appearance. And I think some of it has to do with this idea that the way that site is seen and the way meaning is collapsed around site and then as a parallel around site-specific art. Place houses the act and thus makes this revelatory gesture possible. Place is the generative location where a transformation can occur. However, as the artist is positioned as the acting agent in the scenario, place and all of its contents are staged as subsidiary or supporting players in a drama dominated by the creative protagonist. This pattern in the rhetoric about place and its impact on the interpretation of place-based art can be linked in some respects to Hal Foster's critique of the artist as ethnographer from, it's almost 20 years old now, so 1996 is when that famous essay from Foster came out called The Artist as Ethnographer. And he then took the essay and sort of developed it into a book, a chapter in a book called Return of the Real. So in the chapter entitled Artist as Ethnographer, Foster details the problems associated with an uncritically anthropological approach to art making. Anthropology, he explains, was founded on a mythical mapping of time onto space, wherein over there became back then, and the most remote became the most primitive. This mapping of the primitive was manifestly racist, and yet today remains tenacious because it is fundamental to narratives of history as development and civilization as hierarchy. In the vulnerable environment of Detroit, which has for nearly 50 years held the simultaneous status of over there and back then by way of its abject, neglected, and even fully ruined landscapes, the anthropological gaze need not even be explicit in order to be operational. Place in this city bears the literal burden of the appearance of Kester's certain static functions or states of being, into which interventions, artistic, economic, or otherwise, are readily staged. Foster's discussion of the mapping of the primitive translates effectively not only into the fortitude and longevity of narratives of history as development and civilization as hierarchy, but also their relatives of urban revitalization as development and high culture as hierarchy. Considered in light of the work of Kester and Foster, Kelly's dissident remarks in the biennial catalog, these are his sort of like, this is a project that was doomed to fail, and it's doomed to become another ruin in a city of ruins. bear the trace, I think, of a Deleuzian sensibility as expressed in a sideways reference to the philosopher contained in Foster's specification that both resistance and innovation must be understood as immanent relations rather than transcendental events. Kelly, as an artist of great acclaim, is or was in and of the very systems and practices of art making that he critiques. Yet he launches his resistant critique reciprocally because, as an artist of great acclaim, he is in an economic, social, and political position to launch the critique without consequence. What then is the true nature of Kelly's intervention? Seeking answers to the examination of parallel practices, I'd like to briefly consider intersections between Kelly's thinking on public art and the thinking of Richard Serra, another highly acclaimed established American artist, only 15 years Kelly's senior. Mi-Won Kwon explains that Serra has adopted a language of discomposure with regard to his public artworks and their sites, characterized by an antagonism in which the artwork performs a proactive interrogation, manifests a judgment, presumably negative, about the site's socio-political conditions. Describing Serra's failed public artwork, Tilted Arc, installed in 1981 in Manhattan, Kwon explains that it was removed after its site after 5 years of litigation and controversy because it literalized the social divisions, exclusions, and fragmentation that manicured and aesthetically tamed public spaces generally disguise. Serra mindfully set out to create a sculpture that would radically augment the public experience and reception of a federal plaza in a bustling business district in one of the wealthiest cities in the world. In destroying the illusion, this is Kwon, quote, in destroying the illusion of a coherent spatial totality, unquote, Serra aimed to underscore its already dysfunctional status as a public space. I'm just going to say that again because I think this is like the most resonant one, or the most applicable to the Kelly interpretation of the Kelly's mobile homestead. In destroying the illusion of a coherent spatial totality, Serra aimed to underscore the space's already dysfunctional status as a public space. Serra's explicitly antagonistic stance led to the failure of the work if we consider that the sculpture's removal constitutes a failure. In a sense, Kelly embraced the notion that Mobile Homestead already is a failure to the extent that it suffers from the same fate as all public sculpture foisted upon what he refers to as an unwilling public, the sculpture destined to become just another ruin in a city of ruins. Absorbing this stance towards Mobile Homestead then adds another layer of provocation over top of Serra's platform of literalizing social and spatial divisions, exclusions, and fragmentations. If Serra's civic intervention is linear, then perhaps Kelly's civic intervention exhibits itself in loops, like an airplane acrobat drawing circles in the sky. This is something I've been trying to understand, like how, is it a vortex of meaning, or is it ricochets of meaning, or is it the airplane acrobat drawing circles in the sky? But meaning operates in a non-linear fashion. In their article, Just Art for a Just City, Public Art and Social Inclusion and Urban Regeneration, Sharp, Pollock, and Pattison make the following observation. What Lefebvre warned of as the ability of monumental buildings to mask the will to power and the arbitrariness of power beneath signs and surfaces which claim to express collective will and collective thought is given added weight through the impress of time and habituation. Such contradictions underline the different readings public art attracts, but they also suggest how its meaning for the self, and more specifically for the self as citizen, can be read as more or less inclusive. Kelly's implicit understanding of the complexities of his own subjectivity and the way that this is made manifest in his art is summarized in his description of his self-described negative aesthetic. I think that's the joyfulness of it. But then it's a black humor, it's a mean humor, so it's a critical joy. It's, it's negative joy. But that's art. I think, for me, that's what separates it from the folk art that I'm going to. I still think the social function of art is that negative aesthetic. Otherwise, there's no social function for it. John Miller supports the interpretation of Kelly as harboring a sophisticated understanding of the way that his work interacts with popular culture and institutional power, when Miller writes, "The casualness of Mike's observations belies his trenchant critique. There is no outside to the apparatus. Nonetheless, this apparatus is what bonds us." Kelly's interviews and writings about his work reveal that he was interested in, fascinated with processes of manipulation when it came to the production and meaning of art. Writing about the particularly efficacious tension that can be established between an art object and the written word, Kelly noted that by using a device which in our culture is the most common mode of explication, the written explanation, the expectation is destabilized. What looks so familiar becomes ungraspable. Furthermore, over the course of his career, Kelly demonstrated an increasing self-awareness of his own complex subjectivity, which was in part informed by his own position as an instrument of the art market and its corresponding narratives and value system, even as he remained committed to the weird and undefined possibilities within the making of and interpretation of art. Kelly actively drew upon various artifacts of cultural production, intentionally manipulating viewers' expectations, which demonstrated his understanding of the relationship between knowledge, power, and art's role in simultaneously producing and refusing established systems of knowledge and power. As he wrote in the 2012 Whitney Biennial Catalog, "Mobile Homestead may become another ruin in a city of ruins," but in 1999, Kelly revealed one of the many layers of thought beneath the surface of this critique. When he wrote, "Collapsed under the strain of political discourse, the romantic ruin, as a sign, is itself in ruin." Kelly incorporated and absorbed inherent conflicts within his work, and in interviews took opportunities to make transparent the conflicts that exist within his body of work and the narratives he's produced about his work. As I've discussed in other papers, Kelly felt that going public with this particular project led to a nightmare of complexity, not only in the production of the work, but also personally in its very meaning for him. This stands in stark contrast to remarks Kelly made throughout his career, in which he delighted in the missed signals and misinterpretations that characterize the public reception of his work. Indeed, these were formative experiences which contributed to the forging of his negative aesthetic, which actively toys with a kind of receptive antagonism, anticipating what the public might think and then manipulating expectations accordingly. This was a part of his game, this was a part of his refusal, and this in some respects remained consistent as he pursued his mobile homestead project. Kester, writing about Rancière's use of Barth's idea of the writerly text, notes, "The text, the mediating third, that both links and bifurcates author and reader, viewer and work, self and other, is necessary to guard against the objectification and instrumentalization that is the inevitable consequence of any attempt to achieve a more direct relationship to others. Authority as such is not dissolved or questioned, but simply displaced." Kelly's artistic citizenship then was and is one intentionally founded upon displacement. Rather than adopting Puglisi's role of artist as spokesperson for the creative class, or Rice's role of artist as facilitator for the technocratic elite, or Pasternak's role of the artist as conduit for unique political insight, Kelly exposes the vulnerability of all of these assigned roles by intentionally highlighting the displacing effects of all such artistic interventions. Mobile Homestead is designed not to work. As Kelly claims in the Whitney Biennial Catalog, it has no hope of making manifest the kind of social transformation that the MOCAD and other institutions might claim. And yet for Kelly, in spite of the absurdity of these insurmountable odds and the hubris of these organizational aspirations, the Mobile Homestead had to be made, had to be presented as a mediating third text, which could most effectively illustrate the distance, the dissonance, and displacement between author and reader, viewer and work, self and other, between city and suburbs. Thank you. Okay, good. So, yeah.
Questions?
Please, I'd love questions.
You made it pretty clear when you talked about the power of arts. You thought it, was artistic citizenship
Right.
idea. In any of the things you came across, is there a limit to what we call art? Like which arts are included in this ability to engage the public in critical thinking?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and that is, I think that's on the mind of a lot of people because so much has changed. Like I was just watching a lecture from Michael Stone Richards on the MOCAD website. So the MOCAD has curated a series around art in and of Detroit, and Stone Richards is lecturing on like the relationship between ideas of art and ideas of learning, and in a little bit he sort of traces this sort of process of de-skilling that has taken place over the last, several decades, like 30 or 40 years of art school. Whereas once upon a time, art school was about acquiring certain skills through things like repetition and the master-apprentice relationship. That really was exploded for a lot of reasons. So kind of major political changes in education and ideas of what art is and how and where and how it occurs. And so it's becoming, especially with like the emergence of social practice art, social practice is no longer just sort of a thing. Like the Hirshhorn and the Alison Smith and the Suzanne Lacey pieces I was talking, those are all like known social practice pieces. That's a real art. I mean, you know, if we had been talking like 20 years ago, I think certain people in the room might have still thought like, well, that's not really art, right? But now, oh no, that's really art. So this then is, what are the limits? And I think the thing that's interesting about Kelly is the way that he ropes art back in, not necessarily to a specific thing. In other words, for Kelly, art doesn't necessarily have to look a certain way to be art, and art doesn't necessarily have to communicate in a certain way to be art, but it has to be thoughtful enough to be worth his time. For instance, so there's an interview that he gave a number of years ago where he was really pissed off. He's got some really great pissed off interviews. He was really pissed off because there had been a bunch of people that people had sort of thought were sort of following in his footsteps because they were using things like juxtaposition and pastiche and found artifacts and pulling them all together and creating sculptures in a sort of a fashion or style of Kelly. And he was like, damn it, do not associate my work with that. And the reason he was pissed off was because he felt like, well, sure, it looks like something, so he's not going to say it's not art, but it's not interesting art to him. It's not interesting because he didn't feel like the people that had put all this stuff together had really thought about where all these things had come from and what it meant to put them in relationship to each other. So I think that's the thing. There are lots of interesting conversations about what is or is not art, but at least as it pertains to Kelly, I do think he thinks that there is better art. And the better art is the art that knows why it's doing what it's doing, even if it's a purely intuition. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a linear thought progression. Oh, well, I'm doing this. I'm showing you pink so that you think about flowers. Like, not like, but in a more complex way. Being very specific about why you're doing what you're doing. Very specific about your use of materials. That seems to be interesting to him.
Well, in this context, part of the thing what seems like what he was in more rebellion about to me is a kind of 19th century notion of art. It's here,
Sure.
it's there.
Sure.
Then there is the kind of 20th century hypercriticality, where he's
Right.
pissed off about a lot of things.
Right.
Because that's what artists do. They get pissed off about everything. So that's the new role of the artist. The new role of the artist in the 20th century doesn't know what to be critical about. So it becomes critical about everything, even when it's critical about itself. So it's run into a dilemma that suddenly the jig is up. You can't tell the real from the fake. You can't tell the mediated from the non-mediated. You can't tell what is art and what is imitation. And I think part of what I see a lot of artists go to is the irony is they want to go back to more of the traditional stuff because all this new stuff is like, wait a minute, what are we doing? So the irony is the hypercriticality, that hypercriticism that is a lot of 20th century and 21st century art is now run into a kind of attack on itself. And I think that's part of the problem. I think that's what he's encountering. And when I saw that mobile homestead with the recreation of his own life, but yet the irony was he wasn't happy about his life. Yet that was the very thing he created. You know, it's kind of like, to me, it gets me to thinking that the artists in the 20th century and the 21st centuries are kind of like, they don't know where to go next. And that's like the rest of the civilization is kind of stuck. That's just my comment.
That's a great comment. Lots of really great ideas. Thank you.
Well, this was a talk I had a little bit of trouble getting my head around, but let me ask you this. Of like, maybe specifically the mobile homestead or like any other pieces you showed us, would you like consider them, I don't know, alive in a sense?
Alive.
Because, let me put it this way, if I like read your like evolution of the mobile homestead from just what it was to suddenly it being like a central hub, it's like if this idea he took sort of formed into a person, but as a person, its own personality began to like grow and expand, and like you also talked about how like it has an effect on the people that interact with it, and how they also decide to have an effect back. So would you consider maybe some of these pieces like alive, as in like developing personalities, and also that would you also maybe consider that maybe a parent-child relationship between the artist and the pieces, especially in like some of the different like attitudes and perspectives of the artist, you know, this is what a parent is supposed to do, or